I'm going to present the political system in Australia, and after that I will ask or find out if the system has any sides that can be defined as undemocratic. A federal parliamentary monarchy is the framework of Australian politics. That means that the country has a federal government, but also states who have their own state government. In Australia, there are 6 states together with 3 self-governing territories. All the states have each their parliament, government, and laws. The US and Russia are also federations, and the country is a part of the Commonwealth. Therefore, Queen Elizabeth is their monarch and the head of state. The government's power is divided between 3 branches, which is called parliamentary, division of power. In this case, the power is divided between the legislative branch, the executive, and the judiciary branch. And the power is divided like this to avoid oppressive government. They check and balance each other just like in the US. I will now look at all the branches of the government, and I will start with the legislative branch. The Australian Parliament, also known as the Commonwealth Parliament, is the legislative branch in the Australian political system. The branch is bicameral, which means that the legislative branch is divided into 2 houses, just like in England. According to the first section of the Australian Constitution, the Parliament consists of the monarch and the 2 houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. The Parliament has many tasks. They pass legislation where both houses have to agree to make a new law. The 2 houses have equal power except some restrictions for the Senate about financial legislation. The Parliament also authorizes the executive branch, and they provide from its membership the members of the executive branch. The party with most representatives in the House of Representatives becomes the governing party, and their leader will be the Prime Minister after the general election. The House of Representatives has 150 seats, each elected for flexible terms, while the Senate has 76 members with 12 senators from each state. The Senate has the power to take down the government, which happened in 1975, also known as the Australian Constitutional Crisis. The Senate opens for smaller parties to get involved in the politics as well. Quite often, the government do not have majority support in the Senate. In the Parliament, there is an opposition, which is the party or the coalition of parties which has the most non-governing members in the House of Representatives, and they become the opposition. The function of this is opposing the government, which is one of the most important essentials of the Australian democracy. Then is the executive government, and as a part of the Commonwealth, the Constitution cites that the executive power is vested in the monarch, the Queen Elizabeth, and is exercisable by the Governor General as the Queen's representative. The Governor General appoints ambassadors, ministers, and judges, and also giving royal assent to legislation. The Governor General is the President of the Australian Federal Council and the Commander-in-Chief of the Australian Defence Force. But all that is then based on advices from the Prime Minister. Therefore, the Governor-General is often accused of being just a ceremonial position as he performs the ceremonial functions of head of state on behalf of the Queen. Then there is the Prime Minister, which is the head of the government, and he is the leader of the cabinet, holding office on commission from the Governor-General. The Prime Minister is the leader of the majority party or coalition in the House of Representatives. Then there is the cabinet, and that consists of the senior ministers appointed by the Prime Minister. There are also junior ministers outside the cabinet who are responsible for specific policy areas and report directly to one of the senior ministers. Currently, there are 30 ministers, and most of them are members of the cabinet. There is also something called parliamentary secretaries. That's about 12 members and senators, which are who are appointed by the Prime Minister to represent ministers in their administrative responsibilities. The next is the judiciary branch. The Australian law is built on the common law, and the higher court is established by the Constitution. And other federal courts are created by legislation of the Parliament. The main function of the High Court is to interpret the Constitution and decide whether the law is constitutional or not. but the parliament has more power in that saying, and therefore it has no effect. But the parliament is a subject to the constitution, and therefore the parliament is not empowered to change the constitution without a referendum from the people. So they can't do whatever they want. And each state has their own Supreme Court as well. And that was created according to the Constitution to maintain the self-government principle in each individual state. Inferior courts are secondary and can be appealed to Supreme Courts and thereafter the High Court. The judges are appointed by the Governor General with advices from the Prime Minister, and they can only be removed by a request from the Governor General to both Houses of Parliament on the ground of misbehavior or incapacity. Yeah. Then it's the elections. There are two kind of elections. There is on the national level when we talk about the federal government, and there's also on local and state level when it's in each individual state. So on national level, the election is there's an election at least every third year, and the Prime Minister can advise the Governor General to call in election of the House of Representatives at any time. But election of the Senate can only be held within certain periods according to the Constitution. For the election of members in the House of Parliament, in the House of Representatives, it is used something called instant runoff voting, which means that the voters rank the candidates they prefer rather than voting on one candidate. If a candidate gets more than 50% of the votes, he wins. Or another thing that can happen is if one candidate the candidate with the least amount of votes is removed from the list, and then his ballots or his votes will be added to the remaining candidates according with the preference order. And this has led to a majority of the two largest parties dominating the House. The Senate election is called single transferable vote, which results in a greater presence of minority parties in the Senate. State and local level has elections every fourth year, and each state has a governor and a primer who is the leader of the state government. He's kind of similar to the Prime Minister, but not on the federal level, just state level. And also each state has their own Supreme Court. Yeah. And then I'm going to talk about the political parties. The Australian politics operates as a two-party system, which means there are two dominating parties in the government. And in Australia's case, it's the Australian Labor Party and the Liberal Party of Australia. The Australian Labor Party has 55 seats out of 150 seats in the House of Representatives and 25 out of 76 seats in the Senate. And the leader is Bill Shorten, and they are a Democratic Socialist Party. On the other hand, there is the Liberal Party of Australia, and they have 58 seats in the House of Representatives. They have 3 more seats there, but they only have 23 in the Senate, so they have 2 less than the Labor Party in the Senate. And the leader of the party is Malcolm Turnbull, and he's the Prime Minister today. And they are a liberal conservative party. So now I've gone through the whole political system, and now I'm going to talk about what parts of the system that can be defined as undemocratic or less democratic. In the US, one of the most undemocratic sides of the political system is the Electoral College, which has led to presidents winning even though they didn't have the most popular votes. But due to the amount of Electoral Colleges the state they won in had, they won after all. Bush is an example of that. Also, the lobbyism has been criticized for giving wealthy people more political power. And in Great Britain, the House of Lords was seen as undemocratic due to the members' hereditary claim to a seat, but the hereditary right to a seat is now no longer a rule. But what is it in Australia's system that can be seen as unconstitutional? First of all, it's the Prime Minister is not directly elected by the people, in difference to the US, where the people directly vote for a president candidate in own presidential elections. But in Australia, the party who has won the majority of seats in the House of Representatives choose the Prime Minister, not the people. Also, the head of state in Australia is not even, it's the Queen Elizabeth of England, but she has uh, the kind of a representative, the Governor General. So even though he is representing her, the head of state is still Elizabeth. And if I was an Australian, I would rather have my own queen as the head of state rather than England's. But that's the price of being a part of the Commonwealth. Also, the electoral enrollment and voting is compulsory. And Australia has a two-party system, which kind of leaves minority parties out of the loop, and they don't really get the chance to grow. So, and also having a two-party system like this means that the two parties, they have to cover a lot of needs and requests from a lot of people. So they have changed a lot since when they first started, and they're both moving towards the middle to gain more voters, and they're going away from old values, which many of the voters don't like because they have faith in them, they trust them and give them their vote, and then they change to get more voters and to be able to collaborate with other parties to get bigger. And also the political political class in Australia has been accused for being selfish. I read an article where this man claimed the political class, especially the senators, for being selfish due to the fact that they don't want to do anything big, like no reforms, because they don't really emphasize with the people when it comes to economy and stuff like that. So, because they have pretty high standard, being a senator, you're kind of safe on all levels. So, it was said that the senators had lack of emphasis for the people and were selfish. So that's what I think is the most undemocratic about the system. But overall, I think the Australian political system is very democratic. They don't have any big things like the Electoral College or the House of Lords that really stands out. The only thing I would think that the largest problem will be that the Prime Minister is not elected directly by the people, but still the people elect the party that the Prime Minister comes from. So yeah, so that was my presentation.